As a government, as Canadians, we will always be unequivocal about defending women's right to choose, defending women's rights in general. It's a shame that we increasingly see conservative governments and conservative politicians taking away rights that have been hard fought over many, many years.
As I've said many, many times before, the Conservative government will not reopen this debate. I've been very clear on this. And I find it disgusting and appalling that the Liberals are using this issue to divide Canadians and distract from their record of failure and corruption and scandals. They are literally trying to import a divisive issue from the United States to spread fear.
So the politics around abortion south of the border have, in fact, made their way into our political discourse, at least in terms of a wedge issue, working to create divisions amongst voters. So just how effective is this kind of tactic, and what kind of impact can it have during the federal election? It's Thursday, and that means At Issues here to dig into that and a little more. Chantal Hébert is in Montreal, Andrew Coyne is in Toronto, and Althea Raj is here in Ottawa tonight. Good to see everyone. So, I think that the idea that there is anxiety amongst some Canadian women watching what's happening in the United States is real. I think that's a real thing. But the issue of using abortion as a wedge issue is interesting. And I wonder, Andrew, maybe I'll start with you, how effective it is to take these little issues and try and split the electorate like that.
It can be effective. Every party does it, and every party is mortally offended when the other parties do it. So when the other guys do it, it's a wedge issue. When we do it, it's just drawing significant contrasts. When the other guys do it, it's a fear campaign. When we do it, we're just raising salient facts. It helps if you're going to have a wedge issue, if you're trying to divide the electorate, if you are actually divided on the issue. If that is to say, if there's a likelihood of the Tories and the Liberals significantly dividing on the question of should Canada pass an abortion law. The Liberals have been going to this well in every election that I can recall. The Tories have never, when they've been in power, gone near the issue in terms of a government bill, and I don't think anybody really believes that they will. So you risk, if you keep coming back to this, looking like you're crying wolf.
So there's inherent danger in all wedge politics, Chantal, or just this particular one, or it has to be based in some facts and reality, I guess?
Well, on this one, but in general, wedge politics is also about party branding. If you feel insecure over an issue, because the context has changed, and that would be the temptation that was open to the Liberals on abortion with what has been happening in Alabama. The subliminal message is, you can trust us, but you can't be so sure about these other guys because their leader has voted for all kinds of motions and private members' bill in a previous life that would have reopened up to a point the abortion issue. So I don't think that it's very dangerous, but I do think that it usually involves issues that are core issues for a segment of voters and that will drive them to make a choice or to exclude a choice.
Althea.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole point of a campaign is to build coalitions either of support or coalitions in opposition to the other guy, right? And wedge issues help mobilize your potential voters to come out for you. And we've seen, yes, the Liberals use abortion in the last 2 weeks, for example, using what's happening down south as an example of a wedge issue. But we also we saw them use that issue on the attestation form for the Canadian summer jobs, which frankly backfired because I think a lot of Liberal voters thought, wait a second, this overreach, I'm a churchgoer and I feel like you're attacking my rights. Am I not part of your coalition? We had them use the M103, the motion denouncing Islamophobia, as a wedge issue. We saw Maxime Bernier's party try to use the opposition against the UN Global Migration Compact as a wedge issue. And then Andrew Scheer adopted his position, so kind of nuanced that division that Mr. Bernier was trying to create amongst Conservatives. And we can expect to see a lot more, whether it's more talk about the abortion, frankly, because Andrew Scheer has not been clear. He's someone who supports freedom of conscience amongst all Conservative caucus members. So I think it's right for people to ask, well, would you whip your caucus to vote against would you whip your cabinet to vote against a backbench motion, which he hasn't answered clearly yet. But maybe even Bill Blair floated the idea possibly of a gun ban on semi-automatic rifles. Maybe that's something that would play with, suburban moms who are worried about mass attacks and think that a vote for the Liberal and a gun ban would be a good thing. So there's going to be lots of them for sure.
Yeah, when you're a governing party, and particularly a governing party that's behind the polls, fear is your best friend. You want to raise doubts and fears about the unknown, the opposition party, and you can see the Liberals lining up a whole bunch of them now. They've got this whole tangle of issues around online hate speech and fake news and foreign interference and the sort of that tangle of uneasiness that people feel. That they're pushing and prodding on that and trying to link that somehow to sort of populism and thereby from populism back to Andrew Scheer. We'll see again how successful that is, but again, a governing party quite often will go to that well of why risk the unknown?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even have to be fear; it's anxiety, and I think that the Liberals sense that that's there, and there's something to go after. Yeah, Chantal.
Yes, but as Andrew says, it's not the Liberals; it's a government that may be in difficulty in the polls. Does anyone remember those ads that ran in some communities that the Conservatives sponsored over Justin Trudeau wanted to open brothels and literally hand out drugs to young people?
Yes. Those were curious.
And of course, the classic of the type was the short-lived soldiers in our streets.
Yeah, the soldiers in the
ad.
streets. Yeah.
So they really can backfire if you're over the top.
Yeah.
And what about the niqab issue? Seriously, what was the niqab issue in the last election if it was not being created as a wedge issue?
Yeah.
Or dog whistling to people who are uneasy about diversity by creating this sudden societal debate, which really wasn't a societal debate.
Okay.
So yes, we will see more of them.
Yeah.
The abortion one, I think, is one of the more effective ones for the reasons out here listed.
Yeah, and I think it goes after that part of the electorate the Liberals want to make sure they lock down, and that is women and women in suburbs and things like that. But let me switch topics, switch gears a little bit, and talk about some other political news of the past week. Obviously, the government went on a victory lap after they secured the lifting of the U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum, but it still has this giant problem with China. Have a listen to the Prime Minister earlier this week on that.
We are going to continue to engage on a diplomatic level with China to ensure that the Canadians are well treated as much as possible, and mostly that we move towards releasing the Canadians who've been arbitrarily detained for political reasons. This is something that we remain very concerned about.
I didn't expect that it would become easier in some ways to deal with the Trump administration than China. Maybe that's naive of me, but it's almost like they have figured out how to deal with Trump and to get what they need sometime. Okay, Chantal's already shaking her head at me, so I'll just go to her.
I am shaking my head at you because we understand the American system. It's a democratic system, whatever you may think of Donald Trump. It doesn't even compare to the difficulty of dealing with a regime that has the aspirations that China has and that operates the way China operates. So if we are going to have run-ins with the U.S., I think we can find allies easily within civil society. We can't even begin to penetrate the Chinese system to build some rapport de force with the Chinese government. And if we changed governments tomorrow, that next government would not be better equipped to do so.
And ironically, it's probably because of the U.S. problems with China that the tariffs, got lifted maybe a little bit faster, just so Donald Trump could point to that and say, well, look how I'm doing on trade on another issue. Is there some lesson so there's no parallel, there's no lesson here, Andrew, for the government on how to deal with one or the other? They're just too different and too unpredictable.
Well, first off, I should point out that the government is claiming that it was their own retaliatory tariffs that finally brought Donald Trump to heel. I'm not sure there's a lot of evidence for that. What's common to both of them, of course, is they're both large, unpredictable governments and superpowers who we have very little leverage over. So you play the best hand you can, and it's also hard to really assess how the government's doing on that because nobody would have been able to do this very easily. Maybe they've made some mistakes, maybe they've made some good moves, but it's hard to attribute too much credit or blame for their handling of either of those files. What one suspects, however, and maybe I hope to be proven wrong, but I suspect as the election draws nearer, the Chinese are going to ratchet up the pressure because when you've got hostages Canadian hostages, at some point this country's going to notice that again. And at some point, if the Chinese get very obstreperous, it could become a very emotional issue in the middle of an election campaign. So, as I say, I hope that's not the case, but I think one should anticipate that possibility.
Althea?
Yeah, I don't know if, like Kevin Garrett was in prison for a very long time in China, and it's not because there was a lack of effort from the government trying to get him out, but apparently it seems hostage taking is something that China does when it doesn't like what else is going on with regards to extradition treaties with the United States here in Canada. I think that the parallels are there aren't really that many to make. I agree with Chantal's point. I do think that we understand how the American system works, and we kind of understand what Donald Trump was after, which is a win. He wants to get NAFTA 2.0 passed before the summer, and we are now in a position to help him do that. And Mike Pence's visit that was planned weeks before these tariffs came down, they would have been, obviously that would have been the storyline if he'd been here and the tariffs had not been removed yet. With regards to China, I think the government is very risk adverse because it doesn't want to do anything to jeopardize the 2 Canadians that have been arrested. Sure. And the government's advice from bureaucrats has always been, pretty much in every situation with China, is a very risk adverse strategy. And I think one really does need to be asked if that is the right strategy. And if it is not, what are we willing to sacrifice if we do take a stronger stance?
Chantal, do you want to respond to that on the China point? Yeah.
To the point of this becoming an issue in the election because China would kind of heighten pressure. I'm guessing, and I'm only guessing, that if I were sitting in China, I would see a big advantage at raising the temperature on this in the middle of a Canadian election campaign if the hope was that I would get a different government that would be more amenable to my demands. In this case, that is far from obvious a play because what do you get? You get Trudeau defeated, and then you get an even less Chinese-friendly government in the shape of the Conservatives. So I'm not sure what the interest in that election play would be.
Well, the Chinese have not been behaving terribly rationally throughout this event. They seem to have an absolute, overwhelming interest in this one person getting her home. So that's the danger, is when you're in that kind of thing and people are tempted to play games to pressure politicians, Democratic politicians in the middle of an election campaign. That's the danger, is you get into miscalculations.
Okay, I got to leave it there. Good conversation, everybody. Thank you. But before we go, be sure to subscribe to At Issue, the podcast. You got extra content there. This week, we're going to talk about the federal government's plans for its journalism fund. That should be interesting. Look for it on iTunes, any major podcast app, our website, cbcnews.ca/thenational.